My parents and brother refused to take my 15-year-old daughter to the after she broke her leg. We don't have time, they said. Then they made her walk for 3 hours. I didn't shout, I did this. 4 days later, they were screaming in panic. My name's Brooke Mercer. I'm 36 years old. Before I tell you everything that happened, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And to help this channel grow, please hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel. My world is built on solid ground. I'm an investigator by trade, which means I deal in facts, in timelines, in things you can hold and verify. I don't do well with hypotheticals, with what-ifs, with the vast, terrifying emptiness of the unknown. And there is nothing more unknown to me than the sky. Airports are my personal hell. It's a full-body rejection of the entire concept. The recycled air, thin and smelling faintly of jet fuel and floor polish. The screech of tires on the runway, a sound that always feels like a mistake. The final, awful finality of a cabin door closing, sealing you into a metal tube you have no control over. It isn't just a fear. For me, it's a physical certainty of doom. It started when I was 9. We were on a flight to see my grandparents in Florida, and we hit a patch of turbulence over the Carolinas. The plane didn't just shake, it dropped. That stomach-in-your-throat feeling that lasted for 10 terrifying seconds. I started crying, big, gulping sobs I couldn't contain. And Kyle, my older brother, who was already 12 and infinitely braver, just rolled his eyes from the seat next to me. He sighed loudly so the whole row could hear his disgust. My dad leaned over from the aisle seat. "Toughen up, Brooke," he said, his voice low and hard. "You're making a scene." My mom, sitting in front of us, turned around, her face a mask of pinched annoyance. "Stop being so dramatic," she whispered. That was the day the family script was written. I was the dramatic one. Kyle was the steady one. He played sports. I read books in my room. He was confident and loud. I was cautious and quiet. They celebrated him for it, and they managed me for mine. This fear isn't in my head, it's in my bones. My palms get slick with sweat, my heart starts thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and there's a sharp, metallic taste of panic in the back of my throat. It's a language my body speaks, even when I tell it to be quiet. My daughter Hannah, my daughter is 15. She's everything I love about the world, all wrapped up in one person. She's thoughtful and fiercely creative, with a quiet strength that I know I never had at her age. She's my anchor, the very reason my world on the ground feels so safe and complete. About a month before everything went wrong, she came to me in the kitchen while I was making dinner. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she had a big idea and had already prepared a 3-point argument for it. "Mom," she started, twisting a strand of her long brown hair. "So Grandma and Grandpa are planning a spring break trip, and Uncle Kyle is going, and he's bringing Zoe and Max. Zoe, my niece, is 13, and Max, my nephew, is 12. Hannah took a deep breath. "They invited me to go with them for the week." My hand froze over the pot of pasta. My first immediate instinct was a hard, gut-level no. A tight knot of dread formed in my stomach, the same feeling I get when I see an airport sign on the highway. I pictured Hannah, my quiet, gentle daughter, in the middle of their noisy, chaotic energy, but then I looked at her face. Her eyes were wide with hope. "It'll be fun, Mom, please. I've never really been on a real trip with them, not like this." And she was right. I'd always kept them at a careful distance, orchestrating short holiday dinners and brief birthday parties, always on my turf, always with me there to run interference. A whole week was unthinkable. A pang of guilt hit me, sharp and unwelcome. Was I holding her back because of my own complicated history with them? Was I punishing her for my own inability to just get along? She deserved a normal family experience, or at least the illusion of one. She deserved to feel like she had cousins and grandparents, not just a mother who kept everyone at arm's length. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Okay, you can go." A few days later, I called Mom to talk through the logistics. She was thrilled, her voice a little too bright over the phone. "Oh, it will be just wonderful for the cousins to bond. Hannah needs to come out of her shell a little, don't you think?" I ignored the dig. I had learned long ago that engaging was a losing battle. Then, after a few minutes of cheerful chatter about the historical sites they planned to visit, came the ask. I knew it was coming, it always did. "We're just a little tight right now, Brooke, with everything being so expensive," she said, her voice dropping into a confidential, slightly wounded tone. "If you could just cover Hannah's airline ticket, and it would really help us out if you could maybe spot us for Zoe and Max's too, it would just make things so much easier." The request wasn't a surprise. It was a pattern, one that had been set in stone for years. Kyle was the golden child, the one they bragged about, but I was the reliable one. The one they called when the property taxes were due or when the car needed a new transmission. The airline tickets were $1,180 each, a total of $2,360. My savings account felt that. I swallowed my frustration and agreed. But I asked for one thing in return, my one piece of leverage. "You'll keep a close eye on her, right?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She's not used to being in a big group like that with all the travel." Mom's laughter tinkled through the phone, light and dismissive. "Of course we will. Goodness, Brooke, stop worrying so much. She'll be perfectly safe with us. Don't be so dramatic." I hung up and transferred the money. The transaction confirmation on my screen felt cold and impersonal. It didn't feel like helping family. It felt like I was paying for a service, a premium, gold-plated child supervision service. I was buying their attention, their care. A promise that, deep down, a cold little voice in my heart knew they wouldn't keep. The morning of their departure was overcast and gray, matching my mood perfectly. I drove them all to the airport. The closer we got, the tighter the band around my chest became. I could only go as far as the security checkpoint, of course. My phobia has its own geography, and the line where you show your ticket and identification is a hard border I cannot cross. I stood there and watched Hannah with her cousins. Max was already being boisterous, shoving Zoe playfully as they waited. She shoved him back, laughing, but his was just a little too hard. Kyle just stood there scrolling on his phone, a vague smile on his face. He called it kids being kids. I called it a lack of supervision. I pulled Hannah aside for one last hug. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, trying to memorize the feeling of her being safe in my arms. "Call me every single night," I whispered into her ear. "Anytime. If anything feels wrong, if anyone makes you feel bad, you call me. I don't care what time it is." She pulled back and smiled, a patient, tolerant smile that teenagers reserve for their neurotic parents. "I will, Mom, I promise." "Don't be dramatic." She said it teasingly, not cruelly, but the words still landed like a tiny, sharp pebble against my heart. It was the family motto, and it had already been passed down to the next generation. I watched her walk through the metal detector and down the jet bridge with them, a small figure swallowed up by the crowd. It felt like letting go of a rope over a deep canyon. I didn't go straight home. I couldn't. I drove to the cell phone lot and just sat in my car for almost an hour, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, just staring up at the gray sky as planes took off, one after another, roaring into the clouds. The first few days were fine. The calls came as promised, short and cheerful. Hannah sounded happy. They sent pictures, Hannah and Zoe posing in front of a monument, Max making a goofy face by a fountain. I started to relax just a little. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself they were family and family takes care of each other. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night just after 9. I was at my desk in my home office, working late, reviewing a thick stack of financial statements for a fraud case I was building. The numbers were starting to blur together. My phone buzzed on the desk, lighting up with Hannah's picture. I smiled, expecting another quick "good night, love you" call, but when I answered, the voice on the other end was small and tight, a whisper. "Mom, my leg really hurts." I sat bolt upright in my chair, the financial reports forgotten. The tone of her voice sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my system. "What happened, honey? Where are you?" I could hear a TV playing faintly in the background. "We were at the old fort today," she whispered, and I could tell she was trying not to cry. On the stone stairs, I fell pretty hard. The fear and pain she was holding back were a tangible thing, something I could feel through the phone. My protective instincts flared, hot and sharp. Where's Grandma or Uncle Kyle? Put one of them on the phone. There was a short pause. They're in the other room watching a movie, she said, her voice cracking. I told them it hurt a lot, but they said I'm just being dramatic. There it was, the family motto. The two words they used to dismiss any feeling they didn't want to deal with, and now they were using it on my daughter, against her pain. Hannah, listen to me, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the pain? Another pause, longer this time. I heard her take a shaky breath. Like an 8, maybe a 9, Mom. It's really swollen and it's turning a weird color. My blood ran cold. An 8 or 9, swollen and discolored. Those weren't words you ignore. I told Hannah to hang up, to stay put, and that I was going to call her grandparents right away. I would handle it. I stabbed at the screen of my phone, my fingers suddenly clumsy. I called my mom's cell. It went straight to voicemail. I called my dad's, no answer. I called the hotel room landline. It rang and rang 10 times, 12 times before I finally hung up. Panic was starting to claw its way up my throat. Finally, I called Kyle. He answered on the third ring, his voice loud and cheerful over the blare of what sounded like an action movie. Hey, Brooke, what's up? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I explained what Hannah had just told me, my voice tight and controlled, each word clipped and precise. Kyle, she needs to go to a doctor, now. She says her leg is purple and the pain is a 9 out of 10. He sighed. It was a heavy, put-upon sound, the sound of someone being deeply inconvenienced. It was a sigh I had heard my entire life. Brooke, relax, he said, his tone instantly condescending. She tripped. Max said she was just being clumsy. She's milking it for attention, you know how she gets. The injustice of his words was like a punch to the gut. She is not milking it, I said, my voice dropping, getting dangerously quiet. She is in serious pain. That's not something a kid fakes. You know how she can be, he shot back, his voice hardening. She takes after you, always has. Don't be so dramatic. He promised in that same dismissive tone that he'd check on her in the morning before he rushed me off the phone. He had to get back to his movie. I stared at my silent phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The dismissal wasn't just negligent, it was contemptuous. It was a clear and deliberate message. Your concern is worthless. Your daughter's pain is an inconvenience. And you, Brooke, are exactly who we've always said you are. I sat there in the dark of my office for a long time, the numbers on the pages in front of me swimming in and out of focus. My heart was pounding a sick, heavy rhythm in my chest. My first and only tactic, relying on my family to do the right thing, had failed spectacularly. I had paid them to care and they had defaulted on the deal. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The next morning, my phone rang at 8 o'clock. It was Hannah and she was whispering again, my stomach clenched. Mom, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears, they're gone. What do you mean gone? They went on a winery tour. They left about half an hour ago. They said the tickets were non-refundable and I was fine to stay here by myself. They left her. They left my injured 15-year-old daughter alone in a hotel room in a city she didn't know. For wine, that was it. That was the absolute breaking point. The last, thinnest thread of trust I had in them, a thread I had been foolishly holding onto for years, didn't just fray, it vaporized. A cold, clean rage washed over me, silencing the panic and the fear. There was only one thing to do. I opened my laptop, my movements swift and certain. The airline website loaded, a familiar portal to my own personal hell. My hands started to sweat, the old Pavlovian response kicking in. My jaw locked tight, but then I looked at a framed photo of Hannah on my desk, her smile so bright and full of life. Fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. Her pain was more real than my panic. I clicked through the booking page. One-way ticket, departing in 90 minutes. I didn't think, I didn't hesitate, I just clicked confirm. The drive to the airport was a complete blur. I remember grabbing my wallet and my phone, shoving a charger in my purse, and that was it. I didn't pack a bag, I didn't even think about it. Every single instinct was screaming at me to just get there. At the airport, standing at the gate, the old feelings hit me like a physical blow. The air felt thin, hard to draw into my lungs. The sterile smell, the constant, disembodied voice on the intercom announcing delays and final boarding calls, it was a symphony of my anxiety. Every announcement was a countdown to doom. I found a seat in the waiting area and gripped the armrests, my knuckles turning white. I stared at a small crack in the floor tile, focusing all my energy on that tiny, insignificant imperfection, trying to ground myself. I repeated a mantra in my head over and over again, a frantic prayer. She needs you, she is in pain, she needs you. When they called my boarding group, I stood up on legs that felt like they were made of jelly. Each step down the jet bridge was a careful negotiation with my own nervous system. Left foot, right foot, breathe in, breathe out, don't look out the windows. On the plane, I made a critical error. I chose a window seat. I thought seeing the sky might somehow make it less scary. I was wrong. Watching the ground fall away as we climbed was like watching my own safety net being ripped out from under me. I squeezed my eyes shut, jammed my headphones in my ears with no music playing, and gripped the armrests for the entire 2-hour flight. I didn't move a muscle. At one point, Maria, a kind flight attendant with warm eyes, must have noticed my distress. She came over and quietly placed a glass of water on my tray table. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just stood by my row for a moment, a silent, comforting presence. It was such a small, human kindness, but in that moment it felt monumental. It was a lifeline. The landing was exactly what I always imagined, a controlled crash. But this time, the jolt of the wheels hitting the solid runway wasn't the sound of impending disaster. It was the sound of relief. I had done it. I had made it. I took a taxi straight from the airport to their hotel. I didn't call ahead to tell them I was coming. I didn't want to give them time to stage a scene or come up with a story. I wanted to see the situation for myself, raw and unfiltered. At the front desk, I simply said I was joining the Mercer party and needed a key card to the suite. The clerk, a bored young man who didn't look up from his computer, handed one over without a second thought. I let myself into their suite. The main room was empty, eerily quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning. A half-eaten room service tray sat on the coffee table, remnants of a club sandwich and some wilting fries. A wine glass, empty, stood next to it. I walked through the suite, my heart pounding in my ears. I found Hannah in one of the back bedrooms. She was propped up on a pile of pillows in a king-sized bed, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. And her leg, my breath caught in my throat. It was horrifying. It was swollen to nearly twice its normal size, a grotesque, puffy version of my daughter's slender leg. The skin was a mottled, angry patchwork of deep purple and bluish-black bruises from her ankle all the way up to her knee. I didn't say a word. There were no words for the rage that was boiling up inside me. I just walked over, knelt by her bed, and gently touched her forehead. Her skin was clammy. "Mom," she sobbed, the single word filled with a universe of pain and relief. It broke my heart. I switched into autopilot, my movements calm and efficient, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I helped her get dressed in sweats, my hands gentle as I maneuvered her injured leg. I half carried her out of that hotel room, past a concierge who was busy polishing the brass luggage cart and didn't even look up. We were invisible. Outside, I flagged down a taxi and told him to take us to the nearest emergency room. We were there in minutes. The emergency room was a world of sharp antiseptic smells, the constant, rhythmic beeping of machines, and the quiet, urgent murmur of voices. It was organized chaos. At the front desk, I gave the intake nurse the story in clipped, factual sentences. Fall, delayed medical care, left alone for several hours. She took one look at Hannah's leg and her professional demeanor sharpened. They had her in a wheelchair and back to a triage room immediately. I sat in the small, curtained-off space holding Hannah's cold hand while we waited. They took her for an X-ray, and when she came back, a doctor followed a few minutes later. He was holding the film up to the light panel on the wall. He introduced himself as Kevin Brooks, the ER doctor on duty, a man with tired eyes but a grimly focused expression. "Well," he said, not looking at me yet, still studying the X-ray, "it's a clean break, a fracture of the tibia right here." He pointed to a thin, dark line on the image of her shin bone. "She was lucky," he said, finally turning to look directly at me. His gaze was intense. "This type of break is what we call non-displaced, meaning the two ends of the bone are still lined up properly. If she had kept putting significant weight on it, or if it had been jostled the wrong way during that walk she mentioned, this bone could have easily shifted. That would have meant surgery. We'd be talking about putting in pins and plates to hold it together, a much, much longer and more complicated recovery." He let that sink in for a moment. Then he lowered the X-ray and folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "Can you tell me," he asked, his voice low and even, "why it took more than 24 hours for her to be brought in for an injury like this?" The question hung in the sterile air between us, a quiet but damning indictment. Once they had her legs stabilized in a heavy temporary cast and the first dose of serious pain medication had started to work its magic, the tension finally eased from Hannah's face. She was exhausted, but the fog of agony was lifting. We were alone in the little ER bay, the curtain drawn, and she finally told me the rest of the story. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper. "It wasn't an accident, Mom." I froze. I waited, my entire body rigid, not pushing, not wanting to scare her into silence. "We were at the top of the fort," she continued, staring down at the white blanket covering her legs. "Grandma wanted a picture of me, Zoe, and Max together. I was posing near the top of the stone stairs, trying to smile." She took a shaky breath. "Max," he shoved me as a joke. He was trying to photobomb the picture and make a funny face over my shoulder, but he pushed too hard. A cold, heavy weight settled in my chest, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. "He shoved me," she repeated, as if needing to say it again to believe it herself. I lost my balance and I fell down the stone steps." I kept my voice dangerously quiet, almost a whisper itself, afraid that any louder sound would shatter the fragile truth she was giving me. "Did they see it?" She nodded, still looking down at her hands, which were twisting the edge of the blanket. "Yeah," she said, "they saw everything. Uncle Kyle yelled at Max for a second like, 'What are you doing?' And then Grandma rushed over and said I was being clumsy and to just get up. They said I was ruining the tour, that the tickets weren't refundable. And then came the final, cruelest cut. When I started crying because it hurt so bad, Dad looked at me and said, 'Stop it, Hannah. You're acting just like your mother.'" The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just neglect born from incompetence. It was deliberate. It was punishment for being my daughter. Back in our own hotel room, a different one, a clean and anonymous room far away from my family's suite of betrayal, I watched Hannah sleep. The pain medication had finally pulled her under, and for the first time in over a day, her face was relaxed. The rage was still there, a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach, but as I sat there in the dark, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, something else began to take over. It was a familiar feeling, focus. This was my job. I'm an investigator. I find facts, I document everything, I build timelines, I expose the truth, my panic on the plane, my fear in the ER, that was the mother. This now was the professional. I took out my laptop. My hands, which had been trembling for 2 days, were perfectly steady. The panic was gone, burned away, and replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I created a new, encrypted file on my desktop. The file name was simple, Mercer H. Incident report. Inside, I started a new document. I began with a timeline documenting every call, every text, every conversation. I noted the time Hannah first called me, the time I spoke to Kyle, his exact words. "She's milking it for attention, don't be so dramatic." I wrote down the details Hannah had given me, her direct quotes. I documented the cost of the winery tour I found on their website, $480. The price they put on ignoring my daughter's pain. Then I documented the estimated cost of the emergency room visit, the doctor's consultation, the x-ray, the cast, the medications, the cost of their negligence. This wasn't about family drama anymore. This wasn't about hurt feelings or old resentments. This was about evidence. This was about building a case. The next morning, I left Hannah propped up in bed with the TV remote, a stack of movies, and a promise to be back in less than 2 hours. My first stop was the historic fort where she fell. I needed to see the scene for myself to understand the geography of their negligence. The stone stairs were just as Hannah had described them. Steep, worn down from centuries of use, and dangerously uneven. There was a handrail on one side but nothing on the other, just a short drop to a lower level. It was exactly the kind of place where a joke shove wasn't a prank. It was predictably, stupidly dangerous. I stood there for a long time, imagining my daughter tumbling down those steps. At the visitor center on my way out, I stopped at the information desk and picked up a paper map of the grounds. My eyes scanned it, taking in the layout, the points of interest, the parking lots. And then I saw it. Tucked in the corner of the map near the main entrance was a small, unmistakable symbol, a red cross. Next to it in neat print were the words First Aid/Local Clinic. I used the map's own scale to measure the distance. It was 4 blocks from the fort's main entrance. 4 blocks. They didn't have to find a hospital. They didn't have to call an ambulance. They could have walked 4 blocks to get her immediate medical attention, but they chose a 3-hour walking tour instead. I took a clear, high-resolution picture of the map with my phone. Then I bought a fresh copy from the gift shop and asked the clerk to stamp it for me. It was Exhibit A. My next step was to find the company that ran the winery tour. A quick search on my phone brought up their website. I found the tour my family had taken, the Vintner's Choice package. The online itinerary was clear. It ran from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., not including travel time. They had left her alone and in pain for at least 4 hours. Back in the quiet of the hotel room, I knew I had a strong case for neglect. The map, the doctor's report, the timeline, it was all damning, but the shove, the act that started it all, was still Max's word against Hannah's. And I knew my family. I knew they would close ranks. They would lie. They would say Hannah was mistaken or that she was clumsy and exaggerating, trying to shift blame. They would protect Max, and by extension, they would protect themselves. I needed an independent witness, an objective voice that couldn't be accused of being dramatic. I opened my laptop and went to Facebook. I searched for local community groups, tourist pages, anything related to the city they were visiting. I found 3 active ones with thousands of members. I took a deep breath and wrote a carefully worded post, keeping it as neutral and factual as possible. Seeking witnesses, I wrote. Did anyone see a teenage girl fall on the stone stairs at the historic fort yesterday, Tuesday, around 10:30 a.m.? She is 15, with long brown hair, and was with a group of 2 men, 1 woman, and 2 other children. Any information, photos, or videos from that time and location would be immensely helpful. This is for a private family matter. I hit post and closed the laptop. It felt like a ridiculous long shot, like tossing a message in a bottle into the ocean. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, arranging for a private medical transport service. It was a van with enough room for Hannah to lie down with her leg elevated for the entire drive home. It was astronomically expensive, but the thought of trying to get her through an airport on crutches was unthinkable. That night, just as I was about to go to sleep, a notification popped up on my phone, a new direct message on Facebook. The name was Sam Miller. The message was short and to the point. I saw your post. I was at the fort yesterday morning. I think I might have what you're looking for. My heart, which had been a heavy lump of dread in my chest for days, started hammering against my ribs, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a wild, surging jolt of anticipation. I messaged Sam Miller, a tourist who had been at the right place at the right time, back immediately. I thanked him profusely and gave him my email address, asking if he could send whatever he had. A minute later, my phone pinged with a new email notification. The subject line was simple: footage from the fort. My hand trembled as I opened the email and clicked download on the video file attachment. The little progress bar seemed to take an eternity. I propped the laptop up on the hotel bed, angling the screen away from where Hannah was dozing, her breathing soft and even. I didn't want her to see this. I put in my earbuds, took a deep breath, and pressed play. The video was a little shaky at first, clearly shot on a phone by a tourist capturing the scenery. It panned across the beautiful panoramic view from the top of the fort. Then the camera settled, and there they were. In the center of the frame was Hannah, standing next to Zoe, smiling awkwardly as someone off camera, probably my mom, tried to take a picture. To the right and slightly behind them was Max. I could see him glance over his shoulder, a quick, almost imperceptible look toward where his father, Kyle, was standing just out of frame. The camera shifted slightly, and for a second I could see them all in the background. My brother Kyle, my mom, and my dad, they were all standing there watching the kids, waiting for the photo to be taken. Max looked back toward Hannah, a sly smirk spreading across his face. Then it happened. It was fast, brutal, and completely undeniable. He took 2 steps forward and gave Hannah a hard, 2-handed shove squarely in the middle of her back. It wasn't a playful tap. It wasn't a bit of sibling roughhousing. It was a forceful, deliberate act. I watched, my breath held in my chest as my daughter stumbled forward, her arms flailing as she tried to catch her balance. And then she was gone, disappearing down the top few stone steps with a sickening, audible thud that the phone's microphone picked up. The video didn't stop. It captured Zoe's face, her mouth open in a perfect O of shock. It captured my brother taking a half step forward and then stopping himself, his face a mask of annoyance, not concern. And it captured my mother's hands flying to her mouth in a gesture of theatrical surprise. They saw it, all of it, every single moment. There was no ambiguity, there was no room for doubt or excuses. The entire clip was only 8 seconds long, but it was the hardest, coldest, most irrefutable piece of proof in the world. I saved the file to my laptop, to a cloud drive, and to a flash drive I had in my purse. I watched it one more time, and the cold fury that had been simmering inside me solidified into a solid block of ice in my chest. The lie was completely and totally exposed. The family narrative they had so carefully constructed over decades, Hannah is clumsy, Brooke is dramatic, Kyle is blameless, was obliterated by 8 seconds of amateur footage. My mission had changed. My goal was no longer just to get Hannah home safely. That was the bare minimum, the starting point. The new goal was accountability. I wasn't interested in tearful apologies or tense family meetings that would end with them telling me I needed to forgive and forget for the sake of the family. I wanted formal, official, unavoidable accountability. They didn't just neglect my daughter. They witnessed an assault, actively covered it up, and then systematically blamed the victim to protect themselves from any inconvenience. They made her suffer so their vacation wouldn't be ruined. I opened a new tab in my browser. I didn't search for therapists or family mediators. I searched for attorneys in the local area, attorneys specializing in family law and personal injury. I scrolled through the results looking for the right fit. I found a woman named Laura Bennett, an attorney whose firm had stellar reviews. Her website wasn't flashy, but the headline on her homepage caught my eye. Giving a voice to the vulnerable, that was what I needed. A voice louder than mine, a voice they couldn't dismiss as dramatic. I picked up my phone and called her office. It was after hours, so I was sent to her voicemail. When the beep sounded, my voice was perfectly even, clear, and devoid of emotion. "My name is Brooke Mercer," I said. "I need to report an incident of child endangerment and medical neglect involving my 15-year-old daughter. I have medical reports, photographic evidence, and a video of the initial assault." I left my number and hung up. There was no going back now. I was burning the bridge to my family, and I was lighting the match myself. Laura called me back before dawn, her voice steady and without any of the small talk you get from friends. She'd watched the video twice, she said, and she wanted to meet in person. We sat in a bland little conference room at her office. the kind with no pictures on the wall and a pot of coffee that tasted like it had been reheated 3 times. She laid everything out in plain language. First, she said we'd file a police report to document the assault. That would make the shove and the delay in care part of the official record. Second, we'd file a report with Child Protective Services to document the neglect, leaving a hurt child alone in a hotel for a winery tour. Third, she'd prepare a civil claim to cover medical costs and damages. She didn't use fancy words. She said simply, "We make this a paper trail so the facts can't be brushed away." When she explained the likely outcomes, she didn't dramatize. "Fines, parenting classes, a record," she said, "and since your brother works with kids, this could affect his job." She tapped a pen on the table and looked at me. "Are you prepared for that?" It wasn't a question asking for permission. It was a prompt to measure how much I was willing to lose to make this right. I thought about Hannah asleep in the hotel back home, about the muffled sound of her breathing, about how small she looked with her leg propped on pillows. I thought about the many times my own fears had been used against me. "Yes," I said, my voice tight. "I'm prepared." Laura nodded and started making calls. She explained each step as she went, what forms we'd need, what statements we'd provide, how to handle questions from family members or the press. She told me she'd arrange for someone local to serve the civil papers so it wouldn't always be me delivering bad news. It felt surgical. It felt right. The fury that had rooted itself in my bones turned into something quieter, cleaner. Procedure? I felt like the version of myself I trusted most was back in control, the investigator who put together timelines and exhibits and didn't need anyone's permission to tell the truth. 2 days later, Laura called me while I was folding a laundry basket in my kitchen. She sounded almost cheerful. "The deputy is on his way to your parents' address right now," she said. "He's serving the civil filing for medical costs and CPS will follow up separately. Kyle will be served at his home tonight." My heart thudded, but it was a different kind of thud now, not panic, but a hard, steady beat of resolution. "What's his name?" I asked. "Mark Collins. He's local, quiet, veteran of the county sheriff's office. He'll be respectful. He'll just do his job." I went to the window and watched the street below. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. I pictured the white envelope in a deputy's hand and then Mom and Dad standing at their kitchen table. I imagined the confusion, then the flicker of anger, then the realization as they read the words. It wasn't about revenge. It was about setting consequences in motion. They'd made choices and now they would have to face the results. Mark Collins arrived at their house mid-morning. I got a text from Laura that said, "He's there." A few minutes later, my phone started buzzing with missed calls. Mom called, then Dad texted me, then Kyle's number lit up my screen with a string of calls I couldn't keep up with. I didn't answer any of them. I wanted the deputy to do his job without me interfering. I wanted their reaction to be theirs, not something I staged or softened. An hour later, I got a voicemail from Mom. Her voice had gone from sharp to something like broken glass. "How could you do this to us?" she cried. "To your own family. You've gone too far, Brooke. We're hurt. We're humiliated. You don't understand. We've done so much for you." Her words were a practiced mix of outrage and wounded pride. Dad sent a curt text. "You have made a grave mistake. Call off your lawyers. This is a private matter." Kyle didn't leave a message. Instead, his phone lit up my screen with 17 missed calls in a row. He didn't ask about Hannah, not once. The pattern I'd expected showed itself in full. There was no apology, no concern, only the heat of being exposed. They weren't angry about what they'd done, they were furious they'd been caught. The calls and texts that followed were the first round of a coordinated storm, accusations, guilt trips, threats designed to make me feel like the villain so their actions could be seen as a mistake and not a choice. But there was a new quiet in me, a steadiness that came from knowing the truth was already out of their hands now. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of tea. The steam warmed my palms. The house felt smaller, like the world had shifted 1 degree and everything needed rebalancing. I wasn't the one who needed convincing anymore. The rest of them were. Then, in the middle of the mess, an entirely different call came in. It was from an unknown number, formal and polite, a voice that sounded like it was used to delicate conversations. "Miss Mercer," the man asked, "this is David Ross, principal at Lincoln High." My mouth went dry. Kyle coached basketball there, had been there for years. His reputation mattered to the family like a second mortgage. "I've been made aware of a police report and a child services filing that names Mr. Mercer," Principal Ross continued. "Out of an abundance of caution, the district has placed him on administrative leave while we look into the matter. This is protocol." He spoke slowly, like someone reading from a well-worn script. He then asked, softly, "Would you be willing to provide a statement and the evidence you have? The district will need it for their internal review." Hearing the words administrative leave felt like a physical punch. I thought of Kyle in his gym whistle, in his coaching hoodie, giving advice to kids about how to handle pressure. I thought of the parents who'd applauded him at games, of the weekend tournaments. I had known the consequences could reach this far, but it still hit me like cold water. Principal Ross sounded professional, but his voice held a note of concern about his school, about the kids, about liability. I explained plainly what I had: the video, the map, the doctor's report, the timeline. I told him yes, I'd cooperate fully. I wanted the school to know the facts. I didn't want any child under his watch to be with someone who'd been shown by the court of facts to have made such choices. After we hung up, I sent Principal Ross an email with the video attached and a short summary of events. My fingers hovered for a moment over the send button. I knew that once I pressed it, the situation would move into public records, into files and folders and emails that would be quoted and forwarded, and that would follow Kyle like a stain. It felt irreversible, but when I thought of Hannah, of her bright face and the way she now avoided stares, it felt like the only right thing. I hit send. The little whoosh of the email going out sounded loud in my quiet kitchen. The stakes had climbed again, and I felt oddly calm. The fight had expanded beyond the hotel room and my family home. It had moved into places where other people's safety depended on the truth. That steadied me even more than the courthouse papers had. The calls started pouring in like rain after a long drought. At first it was cousins, then aunts and uncles, people I barely spoke to anymore. Each one sounded rehearsed, like someone had handed them a script and told them where to be angry. "Brooke, your mom is a wreck," one cousin said, voice tight. "They told us you're doing this because of your anxiety," another said. They all sounded concerned, like they were worried about my mental state instead of about my daughter's leg. Someone had already fed them the story my family wanted told. That I was unstable, that I'd finally snapped, that this was some kind of grudge match against Kyle. They leaned into my history, my fear of flying, the nervous tics they'd made fun of for 20 years, and turned it into proof I couldn't be trusted. They painted me as hysterical in a dozen different ways. "She's always been dramatic," my aunt said, as if she were delivering a verdict. "Is this really worth tearing your family apart?" another relative asked, not waiting for an answer. They called to warn me about consequences I'd already considered. They claimed my mom was devastated, that I was choosing to weaponize our family instead of talking it out like a reasonable person. One uncle even said, "You should step back before you ruin everything," as if what they'd done to Hannah could be fixed with a calm conversation and a casserole dish. Their voices piled on, heavy and suffocating, trying to make me feel small and hysterical and wrong. They knew what to say. They used the very thing that had been used against me since I was 9, my fear, as a cudgel. "You're the one who can't handle things," an uncle told me. "Kyle's a great dad, Brooke. Don't make him pay for your mental health." He didn't ask about Hannah. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just told me how I should feel about what I had done. It was a coordinated effort to shift attention and to paint me as the problem, not them. I stopped answering numbers I didn't recognize. I let the calls go to voicemail and read the messages later, like medical reports you prefer to skim. Each one settled into me like dust, but the facts were still facts. The map, the video, the doctor's words, those things didn't take offense at being smeared by gossip. Then came Kyle's message. It was long, the kind of voicemail that tries to be generous while making you feel like a villain. He called it an accident over and over, like repetition might turn it into truth. He accused me of jealousy, of always wanting what he had, the loud applause, the easy approval. He said I'd staged this to get revenge, that I'd been waiting my whole life to get even. The part that landed hardest was the end. He moved past pleading and into threats, the kind that try to sound like tough love but are really punishment. "You do this," he said, slow and cold, "you go through with this and you are no longer my sister. Hannah will never see her cousins again. Mom and Dad are done with you. You will be alone. That's what you want, right?" Hearing him say that out loud ripped open a very old place inside me. They'd always offered love as a trade. "Behave the way we expect and we'll keep you. Step out of line and you're cut off." Kyle made it clear they'd rather burn the bridge than admit they'd been wrong. It wasn't a question, it was a final warning. I played the voicemail back 3 times, not because I wanted to punish myself, but because I needed to hear it exactly as he'd said it. The undertone of righteous anger, the staged hurt. There was no real remorse in his voice, only self-righteousness. It showed me what I already suspected. This wasn't about defending a child or protecting a family. It was about saving appearances. That night, after I stopped shaking and the house settled into a thin quiet, I spread the legal papers on my coffee table like a map of how far things had gone. There were copies of the police statement, the doctor's reports, screenshots of the video files saved in 3 places, the date-stamped map from the fort. The kitchen light hummed overhead. Hannah's bedroom door was closed, and I could hear the soft cadence of her breathing, the small lift and fall that meant she was somewhere between dreaming and waking. The reality of what I'd done pressed down on me in waves. I'd chosen to make something legal and public out of a family's private disaster. I'd called in authorities, I'd asked strangers to witness our private pain. I'd taken a line I'd been taught to cross, don't make waves, and crossed it with my signature. For the first time since the deputy had dropped off the papers, the possibility that I'd gone too far crept in. Kyle was right in one way. This would change things irrevocably. The text from Dad hit like a slap a few minutes later. "Your daughter will grow up without grandparents," it read. "This is on you." The threat was simple, a weaponized version of guilt. They were trying to make me the person who stole family memories from Hannah. The fear they used of being alone was the exact fear that used to make me fold back into their expectations. I almost picked up the phone to call Mom, to speak the soft words that might make her feel better and stop the calls. I almost deleted the videos and asked for forgiveness. For a moment I imagined doing exactly that. Sending one sorry message and letting everything slide back into the way it had been, even if that meant letting the truth die. Then I walked to Hannah's door and put my hand on the knob. She looked up at me when I stepped in, her eyes clear and tired. "You okay?" she asked, like a little adult. She didn't ask for an apology or for me to promise that everything would be the way it was. She just wanted to know if I was present. I sat on the edge of her bed and told her honestly about the calls, the threats, the voicemail from Uncle Kyle. Her face, already slim and serious from the injury, softened in a way I hadn't expected. She reached out and took my hand with one good, steady grip. "Mom," she said, "Max texted me." She showed me the message. "I'm sorry, Hannah, I'm really sorry I pushed you. Dad told me to say you fell, but that's not right. It's my fault. It was small, it was shaky. It was probably the kind of apology a 12-year-old could send with fingers that still weren't steady from guilt. But it mattered. More than anything at that moment, it mattered that someone in that family, someone who had been part of the harm, was taking responsibility without being dragged to it by a court or a deputy. Hannah looked at me with that quiet resolve she'd always had. "It's okay, Mom," she said. "You're doing the right thing." The certainty in her voice felt like a clean hand on my back, pushing me forward. It was the validation I'd been looking for from strangers and from people who would never give it freely. Laura had warned me, her tone gentle when I called her that night. "This is the hardest part," she said. "They'll try to make it about you. They'll try to make the whole thing about your history, your character. Are you sure you want to go to the hearing? Laura gave me space to back out. She wasn't pressuring me. She was giving me a choice and the consequences that came with it. She explained without drama that this is where the facts speak the loudest and that people would try to drown them out with stories about me. I told her what Hannah had said about Max's text. I told her about the voicemail and the calls. Her voice tightened, but only a little. Then you know your answer, she said. You've got the evidence, the video, the map, the doctor. That's what matters in the hearing. I took a deep breath and felt, for the first time in days, a sense of quiet resolve. Laura's words were like an outline I could follow when the emotion was too messy to trust. The court would be straightforward. The truth would be presented. It would stand or fall on its own weight. The morning of the hearing, I got up before dawn. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, the kind of smell you only get in public buildings that have a history. I wore something deliberately plain, a navy blazer, a sweater, and tried to steady my hands by folding and refolding the program the clerk had given me. The room was small, beige, fluorescent lights humming overhead, no spectators aside from the two families and the necessary staff. Judge Patricia Nolan came in with a measured step, a woman whose face looked like it had memorized 1,000 family arguments and learned to see through them all. Laura sat close to me, her folder neat, her pen ready. On the other side of the room, my mom and dad sat together with Kyle. They wouldn't look at me. Kyle's jaw was tight, his gaze fixed somewhere above my shoulder. Mom had one hand clamped in Dad's like a small act of solidarity, and Dad sat with a stern line to his mouth like an old photograph that didn't want to smile. The judge opened the hearing with a clear, plain statement about what the court would consider. The reports of endangerment and neglect, the evidence presented, and the need to make a determination about safety and responsibility. I watched Kyle's lawyer stand up first and speak. He painted a picture of a loving family on vacation, an unfortunate accident, and a sister with personal struggles who was taking a simple event and turning it into something bigger. He used the language my family had been using for days: overreaction, anxiety, history of dramatics. It was familiar, like a song they'd sung at every family gathering when I'd been the child clutching the armrest on a rainy flight. He was trying to make me sound unreliable before a single tape had been played. He was trying to make the room see me as a woman who had always been prone to panic, the kind of person whose words could not be trusted. I sat very still as he spoke, listening to the words bounce around the room. It would have been easy to bolt, to yell that the video existed, to demand he look at the evidence right then and there. But I had Laura. She leaned over and whispered a reminder: show the facts, let them speak. So I breathed and waited, feeling that old knot of anxiety loosen slightly, replaced by the steady method I trusted. This was what I did: I collected facts. I presented them. I didn't need to act like the person they wanted me to be believed. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old varnish, and the sound of a pen scratching on paper kept pace with the lawyer's words. The game was beginning, and I was ready to play by the rules that mattered. Laura didn't raise her voice. That was what surprised me most in the courtroom, that flat, steady delivery that made everything else sound like theater. When it was our turn, she stood and walked to the small table in front of the judge. She laid the printed map down first. Exhibit A, she said, and the clerk placed it under the judge's view. The red cross showing the first aid clinic was clear, 4 blocks away from the fort. She explained in plain sentences how the map showed the clinic and how a short walk would have gotten Hannah help long before the walking tour ever started. Next, she slid the credit card statement across. Exhibit B, she said. The clerk marked it. The charge for the winery tour was right there, $480. Laura pointed out the date and time. They chose a tour that lasted several hours, she said. They chose that over taking a hurt child to the clinic. No flourish, just the hard fact. Then she handed the nurse's notes and Dr. Kevin Brooks' report to the clerk. Exhibit C, she said. The doctor's words were simple: tibia fracture, risk of displacement if weight was applied, potential need for surgery if treatment had been delayed. The doctor's voice from that small emergency room suddenly had more weight here under the court's light. I watched Judge Nolan read the lines and feel the slow change in the room's air. Finally, Laura asked to play the video. The clerk set up a small monitor and the 8 seconds played. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no commentary, only the shove, the scramble, my daughter disappearing down the stone steps, and the 3 adults in the background who watched. I watched Kyle's face go from numb to pale. I watched Mom press her palms together as if in prayer and then let them fall. The silence was fuller than any argument. The video did what papers could not do. It showed what had happened. It bridged the space between words like accident and what my daughter had lived through. When Laura sat back down, she didn't speak more than she needed to. She let the exhibit sit quiet and heavy between us. The other lawyer tried to reframe the scene, to talk about intent and family misunderstanding, to use the familiar lines about anxiety and overreaction. But the map, the bill, the doctor, and the video had already done their work. The facts were on display, simple and undeniable. I felt something in me shift then, not triumph, not joy, but a careful, clean relief, like a weight set down after carrying it too long. Judge Nolan looked at each of us in turn, as if measuring how the truth fit against the faces in front of her. Her voice was neither cruel nor kind. It was the voice you hear when someone has finished reading every page and decides what that reading means. She spoke plainly about what the court could see: a child injured, delayed medical attention, and adults who had witnessed harm and not acted. She called the behavior a failure of basic care. She ordered that the family pay for the medical bills and related costs, $14,750 to cover the emergency room visit, the transport, and other expenses that came out of the incident. She also ordered counseling and parenting classes for Mom, Dad, and Kyle, 12 weeks each, to address how they respond to children's safety and needs. She said the court hoped education would prevent anything like this from happening again. Then she said the part that hit Kyle hardest: a copy of the ruling would be sent to his employer and to the school district. The words landed like a physical thing. I watched his shoulders slump. The judge didn't use sensational language. She simply said the facts and wrote them into an official record. When she closed the hearing and brought down the gavel, the sound felt less like an ending and more like a seal. It made the decision permanent in a way nothing else could. The click was soft, but it echoed inside me. The truth was no longer something I held in my head or on a flash drive. It was written and filed and real. My daughter's injury had been recognized by a court, and their choices had been recorded as consequences. I felt drained and steady at the same time, like someone who'd run a long, terrible race and had finally crossed a finish line that took more than one kind of courage to reach. 2 weeks later, the immediate chaos had settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The school board followed the judge's notice the next week. Kyle lost his job. The letter from the district was formal and brief. They said they could not have someone with the court record supervising children. It stung, the way truth sometimes does when it strips someone of what they thought defined them. Still, it was what the ruling had made possible. A check arrived in the mail with the court's payment amount. No note, no apology tucked into the envelope, just the number that matched the judge's order. I opened it with shaking hands and sat at the kitchen table while Hannah watched me from the couch, her leg propped on pillows. I didn't cash it out of spite. I put it directly into a college savings account for Hannah. It felt right to turn that money into something for her future. The other thing I did that afternoon was something small and precise that still gave me a kind of private satisfaction. For 5 years, I had quietly sent Mom and Dad $400 a month from a side account, an arrangement that felt like paying rent on forgiveness. I opened my online banking, navigated to the automatic transfers, and watched the little number flash up. $24,000 total if counted. I clicked Cancel Transfer. A confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure. I hovered over it, thinking of every time I'd smoothed over a problem with checks and excuses and quiet cash. Then I clicked Confirm. The transfer disappeared. The silence that followed felt absolute, like a bridge gone and nothing left to rebuild on those old terms. After that, the calls dwindled. There were no more angry midnight messages or guilt-laden texts. There was a silence that at first felt lonely and then, slowly, felt safe. Hannah still had scars for a while, more in the way she moved than on her skin, but she was healing. She started physical therapy and bit by bit, the limp grew less obvious. She and Max texted each other sometimes. Once he called and spoke to her without his parents' prompting. He apologized again, this time with a voice that sounded like a child carrying shame he didn't fully understand. She accepted, with conditions. They met for supervised visits a few times at a community center where I sat nearby and listened to their awkward, careful reconnection. She set rules, he respected them. It was slow and real. One afternoon, I found myself looking at flights online with a kind of nervous curiosity I hadn't felt in months. I imagined a beach with a warm breeze and no stone steps. When the familiar tickle of panic rose, my palms dampening, the metallic taste at the back of my throat, I noticed it and let it be. It was quieter now. The fear still lived in me, but it no longer ran the show. I didn't buy a ticket that day. I didn't have to. I had something better, evidence that I would go when I was ready and that I could protect my daughter in ways that looked like stubborn, steady work, not drama. My family had been redefined by what happened. Family was no longer the collection of people who fit the old picture of polite smiles and ignored harms. Family for me now was the small room where Hannah sketched and laughed again, the quiet mornings of bad coffee and homework, the neighbor who brought over soup without asking questions. It was the slow rebuilding of trust in small, careful moments. I had expected total loss, and in many ways I had it, but I had also gained something that didn't feel like scarcity. Boundaries that kept my child safe and a life that rested on truth rather than the fragile currency of appearances. My family called me dramatic for years, but I was just the first one to demand accountability. If you've ever been told you're overreacting when something feels wrong, tell your story in the comments. Please subscribe for more stories, and I'll see you in the next video.